Good morning, good afternoon, in fact. Thank you for having me here. First things first, what I'm going to say is not necessarily the official position of the European Commission. It is, however, very much informed by many discussions I had with colleagues and friends. And of course, anything wrong I'm going to say is their responsibility and not mine. Now, the European Commission has already been investing quite a bit of time, financial resources, and political energy in trying to foster the development of AI technologies and an informed debate about them. We see this as a strategic priority for now and the foreseeable future, and our current thinking is broadly aligned with most of what we heard this morning. Now, this is all I'm going to say about what the European Commission is doing. Use your favorite search engine if you want to know more, or be in touch with me. I'm the only Andrea Glorioso in the European Commission, so I'm pretty easy to find in our internal systems. Now, I strongly believe that technological advancement have already greatly benefited humankind and hold the promise to do even more so in the future. But as we heard this morning, this does not happen automatically. And today I would like to talk about the way we talk about artificial intelligence. After all, to quote an Italian movie, words are important, and those who talk badly think badly and live badly. Allow me a short trip down memory lane. I learned to code on my very first computer, which for those who are curious was an Apple IIe, more than 3 decades ago, quite a long time ago. And that taught me a very important lesson, which is still with me today, even though I do very few coding nowadays. And the lesson was that I could tell a machine what to do. I learned as a child, as a very small child, that we, human beings, can be the masters of the machines, that we can be the ones in command, that we can hold the power, and ultimately that we can be the ones that matter. Now, is this assumption still true? And will it be true in the coming future, with AI technologies becoming mainstream? I really believe that this is the key question that underlies, implicitly or explicitly, each and every conversation about artificial intelligence and, in fact, about technology in general. And it is fundamentally a question about our relevance as human beings, about our role in the world, and who holds the power in the relationship between human beings and machines. Now, if we accept that the debate about the impact of artificial intelligence on the world of work, but more generally, is fundamentally a debate about power, about its acquisition, its distribution, its use, its governance, then it is also a debate about politics in the true sense, in the true meaning of the word politics. Now, in order for this debate to be understandable and meaningful for the people who take political decisions, and I'm not only talking about the top-level decision makers, I'm also talking about citizens. Citizens take political decisions every single day of their lives, whether they realize it or not. Well, then this debate must speak the language of power and politics. And this is where I'm sorry to say that I really think that when it comes to artificial intelligence, we're having a communication breakdown. Now, it's clear that artificial intelligence and machine learning and other subsectors are very firmly at the top of the peak of inflated expectation. You know, the Gardner curve, which I understand has been mentioned several times during this conference, both positive and negative expectations, by the way. AI will be able to reliably identify early-stage cancer just by looking at the small fluctuations in the color of your eyes. AI will obliterate all good jobs, and we will all become serfs to the robotic overlords. AI will predict and stop crimes before they even happen. AI will turn our societies into Orwellian surveillance dystopias. Now, to be clear, I heard all these statements and many more in my day job at the European Commission. And most of these statements came from rather reputable sources, including academic sources. Now, being on top of the peak of inflated expectation does come with certain advantages, primarily that you get the attention of those who take strategic decisions, and that is a good thing. But the problem, though, quite obviously, is that when you're at the top, there is only one way that you can go, and it's down. Now, in my experience, professional and personal experience, there are 3 reasons why technologies fall from the peak of inflated expectations. The first is that they are complete vaporware. They're crap, basically. The second is that they are ahead of their time, that society is not ready for them. But the third is that somehow we collectively do not manage to engage all the relevant stakeholders, which in the case of artificial intelligence basically means everybody. literally everybody in society, we do not manage to engage the stakeholders in a meaningful discussion about the pros and the cons using a language that the stakeholders, the people actually understand, and arguments that actually matter to them. Now let's park the first two cases. Vaporware crap and the timing issue, I'm not going to discuss about that. For the record, I do not believe that AI is, generally speaking, vaporware or crap. I think there are some examples, but in general, I think it's a very promising technology with already very good results. But let's focus on the engagement part, and that is where I think that we are really collectively, and by the way, that means also on our side, that we're really not performing very well. And I think that's because the debate about artificial intelligence is way too much about the cool and maybe useful applications, but too little about the power relations. And it is too much about what artificial intelligence could do for human beings, but not enough about what it means to be a human being in an age of artificial intelligence. And I really think that's an issue because in deliberative or discursive democracies, which are the modern democracies that we live in, having the right kind of debate on what really matters to people about artificial intelligence has enormous, huge implications in terms of how these technologies are perceived, how the expectations about their effects are management, which in turn has massive effects on the kind, extent, and direction of all kinds of investments, political, financial, regulatory, etc., about these technologies. Ultimately, it decides whether these technologies survive or do not survive. Now, in this spirit, I would like to offer 3 suggestions on how to frame the debates about artificial intelligence. And these are, of course, very much influenced by my job as a policy officer of the European Commission for the past 12 years. So, first suggestion, there is no such thing as a neutral management of resources, whether that management is made by human being or by machine. So we must be very clear when we discuss the application of artificial intelligence beyond the laboratory, in the real world, we must be clear what those applications mean in terms of power relations. Which people do the application of any specific application of artificial intelligence, which people do they involve? What are the existing power relationships between those people? Does the introduction of artificial intelligence alter, and how, those power relations, and if so, to the advantage of whom? So in short, who are the winners and the losers when we try to introduce AI or technology more generally in a factory, in a hospital, in a school, in a whole country? Now, these are very difficult conversations, mind you. And to be fair, very often we don't have a lot of data. So it is fine to have nuanced opinions on how power relationships work. What is not fine, though, and I personally believe is very dangerous, is to hide the existence of these power relations behind vague language, implicitly or explicitly assuming that artificial intelligence is a quote-unquote neutral agent that will do some generic good to some generic society based on some data that tells us something. Data does not say anything by itself. We interpret the data and we choose how to interpret the data. And what is good for me is probably not good for you. So at some point, we need to get to an agreement on which kind of compromise we're going to reach on what is good for each of us. And societies are not amorphous blobs. You cannot linearly improve a society. You need to understand what's actually the reality in the society that you're intervening on. So in short, we have to be explicit about the power relations, or at least openly recognize when we talk about the application of AI, explicitly recognize, listen, honestly, we did not have enough money in our research funding to study these power relations. Fine, but at least let's say it very explicitly so that people who read what we produce can make their own assessment. Secondly, I think that too much about the artificial intelligence debate, including when it comes to the impact on labor relations, is about change, if not sometimes outright disruption. Now, to be clear, there is nothing wrong with change per se, but we really, and we heard about some very interesting psychological research, which I promised myself I would try to understand a little bit more about. We should really not overestimate people's appetite for change. And we should not underestimate the mental stamina that is required for people to constantly adapt to change. We are biologically not designed to do that. Not at the kind of speed or pace that some, not all to be fair, but some proposers of AI are putting on the table. And by the way, and this was mentioned by the speaker before me, but there are hard questions, which are questions about power. Who pays for the adaptation to change? And that's a very important question. It really changes the way in which people react to the proposition that change has to come. Now, given that we collectively, but especially Western societies, which I understand is a bit of a fuzzy term, but let's say European and US societies, which are the ones that I know best, have already undergone in the past few decades through massive changes. Globalization, the opening of trades, migration flows, now environmental crisis. And what we have to keep in mind is that, and we see this very, very clearly at the European Commission, most people do not feel they are responsible for those changes. And yet they are asked to pay for those changes, to adapt their lives because of those changes. And now we're telling them the robots are coming, so tough luck for you, you need to adapt. Well, I am not surprised that I'm not jumping around with joy at that notion. So I guess the key recommendation here in terms of, again, don't forget, these recommendations are about how we talk about artificial intelligence. It's not what we do about artificial intelligence, it's how we communicate about artificial intelligence. And the key recommendation here, do not assume that because you make a living out of creating change, which is, by the way, a pretty nice way to make a living, it's intellectually interesting, it's fascinating, but do not assume that because you make a living out of creating change, that everybody else is happy about that change. And at the very least, be very clear about what, to the extent that you can, of course, but be very clear what that change that you're trying to create and to push, what it entails, and who's going to pay for it. And if at all possible, also try to think about what mitigation measures can be put in place in order to mitigate the worst effects of change, because there will be bad effects out of change, because as I said before, somebody wins and somebody loses in every instance in which there is change. Now, third and last recommendation, and this is perhaps maybe not the most controversial, but the one which I must admit I am myself the most, I'm still thinking about it. Let's be very, very careful about any discourse, any communication on artificial intelligence that focuses on making humans better at what they do, especially when we're talking about work. Now, right or wrongly, and others have said it before me, we identify very strongly with our jobs. When you're at a party and somebody comes to you and asks you, so what do you do? Your answer is usually, I'm a doctor, I'm a physicist, I'm a technician, this is the job I do. And when you're a small child and you're asked as a small child, so what do you want to be when you grow up? The answer, I want to be happy, is not an acceptable answer. You're expected to say, I want to have this job when I grow up. So I am my job is a conscious or unconscious assumption for many, many people out there. And so, and here comes the rub. The proposition that AI can make humans better at what they do can very quickly become making humans better at what they are. And that is the issue, because very few people are truly comfortable with the notion that they're not as good as they think they are, especially when that assessment is made by machine, and especially when in most cases, you as a human being cannot actually make the reverse assessment. Very seldom in the AI scenarios that we're depicting, we are explicitly designing for human beings judging the way that machines are performing, while we design for machines judging how human beings are performed. And again, this is about power relations between men and machines, and between men and human beings, and other human beings behind those machines. Now, I admit I do not really have a key recommendation here, but I would like to offer you an observation by quoting the historian Yuval Harari, who wrote a couple of very interesting books recently, that the main struggle in the 21st century will not be against human exploitation, but against human irrelevance. And so keep that in mind when you suggest better ways for people to do stuff, because you don't want people to feel irrelevant. I'm sure that is not your suggestion, but that is the way in which the suggestion can be interpreted. Now, to conclude, and I take the opportunity to remind you that very few of this is an official position of the European Commission, just in case you were wondering. Now, you might know the story about that man who falls off a skyscraper. And on his way past each floor, he looks at himself and keeps saying to reassure himself, so far so good. 30th floor, so far so good. 19th floor, so far so good. But we all know that is technically true. But the problem is not the fall, the problem is the landing. And now, if artificial intelligence has to get down from the peak of inflated expectation to the so-called the throw of disillusionment, and hopefully then get to the point of the plateau of productivity, I would personally like, because I deeply believe in the power, in the beneficial power of technology and artificial intelligence, but I would like that to be a controlled descent and not a free fall. Because if it's a free fall, by the time we get down there, we might not be able to stand up again. And I believe that being a little bit more open, in fact, a lot more open and clear about the power dimension of the changes brought upon by artificial intelligence and machine learning will help with this exercise. And this political dialogue, again, it is a political dialogue because it is a dialogue about power, needs to happen in a language that people understand and relate to their experience, to their daily experience, to stuff that they actually care about. And I think we are collectively responsible to do that. Thank you very much.